Thanks so much. I was talking a little earlier. Thanks, Christine. And so that's me, Ayla Moore. I started here in 1996 in the writing program. I'm like the McDonald's of writing. I've taught tens of thousands of students. I've served tens of thousands of students with academic writing. And more recently, now I'm in the Center for Teaching and Learning. And when Christine and Ben Waddell contacted me a few months ago and said, we want you to be part of this speaker series, I thought someone bumped their telescope away from the brighter stars of the constellation of Fort Lewis College, and it went to the nether regions, and it was looking in the darkness, and they're like, oh, we think we see something there. And I said, no, I'm not. That's not me. I'm not who you want. There are other people who can do this, and that's who you want. And I thought I could go on with my life. But they leaned in, and they said no, just so you guys know. They said no. They said, we think you have a story to tell. And so in gratitude, thank you. And I think I do have a story to tell, and this is the story I want to talk about here today, is this power of not belonging. I want to start off with how many people here, just by a show of hands, have ever felt, I don't belong here? Whatever your here is. How many people have ever felt, yeah, okay, look, I mean, it's like everybody, right? And my hand's up too. Let me ask this now again, more directly with higher ed. Think about your time as an undergraduate. Think about being here at Fort Lewis College, wherever you want to place it. How many people, show of hands again, have ever felt I don't belong here within the context of higher ed? Okay, yep, we're exactly what I thought. So I've been wondering about this idea of belonging too. As I mentioned sort of earlier in my job at the Center for Teaching and Learning, I try to scan the horizon for what's going on other campuses. And belonging really is this big campaign happening right now, and people are linking it to student success. And I'm not saying it isn't linked. I'm just interested in it. So when I wanted to think about this topic, I go to people on campus as I start to do my research. And I thought, well, psychology and philosophy, those would be two great places to start to ask this question about belonging. So you have here Dr. Brian Burke, who's in psychology, and then Dr. Justin McBrayer, who's in philosophy. And they are fantastic, and I think of them as my illuminators. And they possess such deep intellectual humility that they will take the time to, assist me in my thought making. And I went to them and I said, from your personal or disciplinary perspective, tell me about belonging. Like, what does it mean in a psychological viewpoint? What does it mean philosophically? Tell me more about belonging. But here's what happens when you talk to people who have deep intellectual humility. They don't give you answers. Instead, they just ask you a lot of questions, which sort of pisses me off. So I'm like, just tell me what I'm supposed to talk about, because, or I'm going to chat GPT, whatever you want. So this is where the interrogation began. They sat down, they folded their hands in their laps, and they just looked at me, and they just started to ask me these questions. And so I share these questions with you, because I think these are important to us. What do we mean when we talk about belonging? What exactly are we talking about? I feel like it's a word we bandy about, and everybody thinks we know what we're talking about, but I'm not sure that that's true. And then, are there essential criteria or necessary conditions that are part of this manifestation of belonging? Like, what's got to be present, right? And is belonging to different from belonging with, right? And that feels like there's something there for me, but I don't know. This is the one I haven't read because this is the one that resonates with me. Who decides if you belong or not? Where's the agency here? And how much belonging do you really need? Do you need to belong in every single space that you move into? Is 50% belonging good? Is 5% good? So again, if we're going to quantify it, what does that mean? Is it the same for everyone? Does everybody feel belonging in the same way, or is it different? How does belonging regulate your identity? How does your identity give you access or not access to certain forms of belonging? How does belonging impact learning? Or does it foster or manufacture insecurity instead? What interventions work? What rights? Say you belong. What you got? What rights does it afford you? What do you get when you belong? And then on the flip side of that, what are your obligations once you belong? Do you suddenly have to sort of silence yourself to go along with the dominant majority thinking? Do you get to raise alternative viewpoints or not raise alternative viewpoints? And then this is where, in my conversations with Justin and Brian, I just get exhausted because their ability to do mental acrobatics are they can stay the course, and I'm like, I gotta go. And so this is where I always say, what if we just waved a magic wand and we didn't think about it anymore? Is that better? And they didn't answer that question either. So years ago, with a set of administrators at Fort Lewis College, there was a robing ceremony that happens before graduation, and it is graduation is one of my favorite events at Fort Lewis College. It's really so powerful. It's like I'm attending a wedding of somebody I don't know, and I'm tearing up, and I love the whole thing. We were invited as faculty, to robe up prior to graduation, right? And so that's where we go into a room, we put on our robes, and then we enter in this promenade into graduation. And it's all very pomp and circumstance, and I love every minute of it. I didn't read the email carefully. I got to the first room, and it was in the Student Life Center, and I'm walking in, and I smell bacon. I'm like, oh, bacon. We're going to have bacon for breakfast. I'm so excited. I look in the room. I don't recognize anybody except for the president of the college at that time. And I'm like, okay, I don't know where Leslie is. I don't know where my friends are, but they'll come, and there's bacon. And so I go over, and I'm starting to put bacon on a plate. And the then president of the college comes up to me and says, you don't belong here. This is for the platform committee. And those are the people that get to sit on the stage during graduation. And the president said, this is for the platform committee. And you go down the hall. And I'm like, can I take the bacon? So, I left the bacon, and I went down the hall, and we had bagels. And there was my friend Leslie, and I'm like, okay, this is where I belong. So that was, a bit of an embarrassing. I should have read the email, didn't read the email. Plagues me to this day. It's fine. Whenever I am told I belong, I feel unsettled. Most of my life, I've felt a sense of not belonging, which I'm going to share with you in a second. I feel recruited. I feel like I've been placed into a club that, as Groucho Marx says, I'm not really sure I want to be a part of. We know that belonging is different for everybody, and these are some of the broader definitions of belonging, that it's this idea of being happy or comfortable, of being in the right place, that you're put in the right place, that you are the property of someone. These are my belongings. That's the one where I'm always like, ooh, that's how it feels to me. It feels kind of constraining. Or to be the member of something, this idea of joining. Maslow, Abraham Maslow, was a humanist psychologist, and he was known for creating this hierarchy of human needs. And when we think about doing research on belonging, you have to talk about Maslow, because his belonging is right dead center in that hierarchy of human needs. But I wanted to point out, in the 1930s, he spent time in Alberta, Canada, with the Siksika, or the Blackfoot people. And this is prior to his development of the hierarchy of human needs, which happened in 1943. And I asked Brian Burke, I said, is it possible that, his time with the Blackfoot people influenced his development of this really popular idea that has really withstood the test of time? And this is what Brian Burke says: while accounts may differ, Indigenous values likely influenced his famous hierarchy of needs theory as he engaged in field work with the Blackfoot people in the 1930s. So I think it's really important to acknowledge this. So that's Abraham Maslow sitting on the edge of the car, and that's Howard McMaster, who was kind of his guide and interpreter in the 1930s. How many people knew about this? Yeah, okay. Yep. Yay, knowledge. Okay, here's the hierarchy of needs. So let's look at this. And I feel a little, embarrassed right now, because I've got a psychologist in the room who's going to be, I feel a little judgy going on here, but I know you're not judging, but I just feel it. So here's the hierarchy of needs. And please, Amanita, at any point, if I say something real dumb, like real dumb, go ahead and say, yeah. But if it's just a little dumb, let's just let it slide. Okay. So hierarchy of needs, and you can see, like, at the tippity top is this idea of self-actualization. Self-actualization, which is you and your destiny, and you get to pursue all the things that are you. Lucky you. I'm going to tell you, you didn't have a Latin mother. That's not what happens in a Latin household. And then, and the reason that it's a peak is that very few people actually get to this space, right? Then you have belonging and esteem, and then down below you have the basic needs of warmth, water, safety needs, etc. A couple of critiques here with this is it wasn't data-driven, which is a word we like to use. It's a little subjective. When it's been applied to more collectivistic cultures, these things tend to shift. Self-actualization becomes social development because it's not about the self in collectivistic cultures. But still, like, it's an interesting idea. But what he doesn't talk about here is how much belonging do we actually need? I grew up in a diaspora. A diaspora is a Greek term for being scattered. And it's people from a homeland who leave that homeland and relocate to another place. And relocation can happen for tons of reasons, right? So let me tell you about my family. Here is a picture my mother hates. And that's my mom, that one there. That's my great-grandmother, Rogelia. This is a cousin. These are some of my aunts. This is a lechon. It's a pig on a stick. You can see the straw thatched hut back here. 1948, really near the Maslow's hierarchy of need time, by the way. And my mother's from Puerto Rico. And she came to the States to study. This is me wearing one of my great-great-grandfather's hats in Puerto Rico. This is my grandmother, Lenore, and my step-grandfather, Rafael. The coquí is a huge part of how I remember Puerto Rico. It's a little tree frog that sings coquí, coquí. And you could hear it at my grandmother's house. That was in La Perla. We went to Vieques, which is an island that the U.S. Navy had bombed incessantly, and they had a really neat art display. And so I love that picture there. My father was Turkish. Yep, Turkish flag. My father came from Turkey. And this is our family tree. And what I want to point out here is this is my grandfather, Refet Ulgen. There are no last names. He was the first one to get a last name. Growing up in a diaspora, I'll tell you, is wonderful. You get great food. The food's amazing. We had belly dancers at cocktail parties. That's just what was, you know. But neither of my parents spoke each other's language. So I didn't grow up fluent in either language. And I think this feeling of not belonging is very common for kids in a diasporic household, especially a multi-diasporic household. Never felt like I quite fit in with the Turkish community, didn't speak the language. I can say bad words, but you can't go around saying that when you're a kid. Didn't feel like I fit in with the Latin community. I speak Spanish really roughly. I dance like a gringa. I mean, it's all sort of embarrassing in a way. And then I also really didn't feel like I belonged in the white community, right? These are my kids. That's my husband. That's my youngest daughter. Here is my oldest daughter. Oh, that was her. And I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. Yay, Baltimore. But what I want to say is I grew up in an abundance of love, right? In spite of these feelings of not belonging, you know how Maslow connected love and belonging. I grew up with a lot of love, but a lot of feeling that I just didn't belong. This is what it sounds like to grow up in a diaspora. Blah, 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 Ayla, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, what'd she say about me? Right? And it was always very, very fast. So, you know, you're sort of in between a lot of times in the diaspora. I went to, when you think about a diaspora, this scattering, this leaving your homeland to come to a different place, there are many forces of diasporic relocation. Sometimes it's exile. Sometimes it's expulsion. It can be enslavement. It can be capture. But for my parents, it was opportunity. It was relocation due to opportunity. And they believed so much in the meritocracy of education. So they put me and my sister in a real fancy private school, all girls, 12 years. I wore a uniform 12 years. And this was a poster that was really popular at the time, and I swear to you, I dated a guy with that same last name and the same Roman numerals. The dominant majority was this. And they even had a phone book. It was called the Blue Book, of people who came from the Mayflower and were direct lines from the Mayflower. And the education was great, but sometimes the exclusion and the not belonging was really painful. There were parties that my friends would have, their coming out parties that I was not allowed to attend. I would hear, because I look so fair and I have blue eyes, I would hear young boys at parties talk really disparagingly about the Puerto Rican people that they didn't even know. And I would have these moments thinking, I should say something. I'm like, no, don't say anything. You're trying to fit in. I want to say something. No, don't say anything. You're trying to fit in. And I remember that, right? Because I think back to my family that I love so much. I never said anything. A lot of Hispanic or Latino US residents mark themselves as other. And I felt that my whole life I've kind of been an other. Neither this, neither that, not anything really. And what happens then is you seek identity and you seek belonging. So I became a smoker. And it was easy, right? My decisions were made. I go into a restaurant. They're like, where do you want to sit? Smoking, non-smoking? I'm like, smoking. I am a smoker. It was disgusting. Like, you're eating food in this cloud, right? In an airplane, which is the biggest joke, that there could be a non-smoking section in an airplane where they were smoking, because you're just in a little metal capsule. And they're like, smoking or non-smoking? I'm like, smoking! I'm going to the smoking section. And Maslow once said, like, our desire to belong is so intense, right? And when we seek to belong, we sometimes crave an identity for people to tell us how to be, what to think, how to act. And I became a smoker. I'm like, yes, smoking section, that's me. I'll see you guys out there. And whoever else was out there, we had that in common. We belonged. We were smokers. But here's my problem. When belonging becomes the goal, it can lead us into some really dangerous territories. This need to belong should not be the goal. And we see this campaign being amplified. This is from the National Academies of the Science, Engineering, Medicine. This is a great research article. They looked at what really creates student success. And you can see there are 3 things, and belonging was a big one. They said belonging is huge for students, but they didn't really talk about what it meant. We see utility goals. How important and relevant is my education to what I want to do? That's really important too. And then growth mindset was equally as important. But I think of belonging in a diaspora as a bit of a double bind. That we try, people are telling you, oh, you should belong. It's really important to your success, but you feel like you don't. I feel like it manufactures some forms of insecurity where we get these messages of belonging as normal. But when I asked you, how many people here felt like they didn't belong in higher ed? Almost everyone raised their hand. So what are we talking about when we force this conversation about belonging? And Leslie mentioned imposter syndrome. In fact, higher ed is the birthplace of imposter syndrome. 2 clinical psychologists were the one who researched this. And so the question is, how important is belonging to being successful? It's not. They researched women who were graduate students, medical students, professors, undergraduates, by all accounts and measures. That's pretty successful. But they felt like they didn't belong. They felt like they were imposters. They couldn't take the praise that they were getting. They couldn't feel the rewards they were earning because they felt like somehow they didn't fit in. Imposter phenomenon is pervasive in higher ed. And it's in everybody. If you're the first in your family to go to college, you feel it. If you're a faculty member with a PhD, you feel it too. So we're all feeling it. But we're not talking about it. And we're saying, oh, everybody needs to belong, but no one feels like they belong. So we're just sort of making this really a not healthy situation. And I believe when we begin to question our belonging, we stop learning. Because we get so wrapped up in our imposter syndrome and who we are and our people judging us that we stop learning. I want to show you some data from Fort Lewis College students. We asked them, this was a survey we sent out. We asked them, how many of you withdrew from a class? There was a number, I can't remember. We said, why'd you withdraw from a class? The number one reason they withdrew from a class was they just didn't feel like they could be successful. That makes sense. Much lower indicated was, I didn't feel welcome in the class. That just didn't seem to matter as much. And yet we're pushing this campaign of belonging. I'm interested in the work by John A. Powell. He is at University of California's Institute of Othering and Belonging, and he has this concept called targeted universalism, which I see a couple of people nodding. We talked about this in a class that I facilitate. Here's what targeted universalism is. It's really profound. You set a universal goal, And that goal is not belonging. It is not. You set a universal goal. Students develop more agency. You become more agentic in your learning. Or we learn how to have really uncomfortable conversations, but we do it in a really civil, productive way. I think that's important. I think that's really important. So it's a goal that everyone can benefit from. No matter who you are, no matter where you came from, we're all going to move towards this goal. But you have to recognize people are in different places. You have to recognize people's situatedness in their distance to or from that goal. And then you target strategies. So this is where belonging can be a targeted strategy. If you need it to get to the goal, you got it. If you don't, you're all right. It's all right. Students were interviewed. This was an online survey. I think 2,400 students were interviewed. How do you know your college degree is worth it? Number one, it prepares me for life after college. We'd hope, yeah. 2 and 3 were really interesting. I want to be able to talk freely on campus, and I want to meet with people who have different ideas than I do. Students want to have freedom of conversation and ideas, but yet higher ed seems to be regulating ideas. Much lower indicated, right above admissions standards, was belonging. In fact, and there's another survey that came out, the numbers were a little different, but college is a silent movie. And most students self-censor in the classroom because they don't want people to think they've said something offensive. They don't want to upset anybody, right? And so we're just silencing ourselves in this way of thinking that's how we belong here. And we don't talk anymore. This is David French. He's a New York Times columnist. He went to Yale. And he said he thought college was going to be this place where you could have ideas, they could have conversations and discussions. And he found that in his college classes, as a white conservative evangelical, students saw him as an enemy to be vanquished rather than someone to get to know. And they were more apt to boo and hiss at him than to spend any time in a real conversation. And that's how students measure whether their degree was worth it or not. This came out by Pew Research Center. There was a similar one from Gallup that came out as well. We know right now in the U.S., perceptions of a college education are really getting scrutinized. And it's being called the Great Diploma Divide, where Republicans, and lean Republicans doesn't mean people who are real slim. It means independents who lean towards Republican, and then same with Democrats, independents who lean Democrat. Look at those numbers. From 2012 to 2019, that huge drop in whether or not you think college is worth it, if it has a good effect, if it's a public good. Even among Democrats, I mean, the numbers, not great. And then among all adults, you see this perception that college isn't worth it. According to this one researcher on the diploma divide, they think higher education is the major driver of all the ideological divisions we've been experiencing in the U.S. And I want to tell you, it's really just happening in the U.S. In Canada, rates of higher undergraduate education ticking up higher than ever. In Europe, all of our global competitors, students are enrolling at much higher rates than they are in the States. So something's going on here. This was a climate survey that I helped to administer back in 2019, and it's a snapshot in time. And the question was this: how comfortable are you, students, sharing your views on diversity? And so the first column are undergraduates. The next column are our 3 graduate students who filled out the survey. The third column in the gray are faculty. The fourth column are staff. So the gray is Fort Lewis. The white columns, it's again students, undergrads, faculty, staff, are other small colleges, similar to ours based on size. We're kind of in the less comfortable, we're kind of in the more uncomfortable than the numbers compared to other schools. But the thing I thought was the most interesting was this one. We were really high on students being like, I don't care. I just want to learn math. I'm just help me with math. This is interesting too. How would you rate your sense of belonging at Fort Lewis College? Same, you know, undergrad, our 3 graduate students, our faculty, our staff, and then compared to other schools too. Once again, Fort Lewis College, we're like, oh, it's all right. I mean, it's neither here nor there. I just want to learn MLA citation. Can you help me with MLA citation? But then I thought this was really interesting too. So the question was, how many negative experiences have you had at Fort Lewis College in terms of insensitive or disparaging remarks? And you can see that non-binary individuals said they heard more disparaging remarks than men and women. People of color heard more insensitive, disparaging remarks than white. LGBTQ individuals heard more than heterosexuals. Liberal students heard more than conservative. And that took me by surprise. That's why I love this type of data. And middle of the road individuals felt they heard more disparaging remarks than conservative students did too. College is a diasporic site. No one belongs here. That's it. That's what I want to tell you. We have all been scattered, and we've come here for reasons of opportunity. Hopefully not for exile or expulsion, but we've come here for reasons of opportunity. And none of us really belong here. Look at this. Look at the diversity here. We asked first-year students, 160 responded. We said, what doesn't motivate you in class? Look, it's everything. Here we see this full representation. It's whether I don't get feedback. It's whether I get bad grades. It's whether I have too much work to do, or class is a really long lecture. We said, well, what does motivate you? Some of our students said, I'm going to support myself and my family. Some students said, I really love good grades. Some students said, I just want to learn how to learn. Getting my degree, positive feedback, right? So we see all these multiple reasons. We see the rich diversity here at Fort Lewis College. We said, why'd you come to Fort Lewis College? The majority was, yeah, I want to get a degree. But then I thought it was interesting, the blue arrow, I want to help the people in my community. Ranked higher than I'm going to make money. I thought that was really, really cool. And I'm going to tell you, this is not common, I think, at other campuses as well. Yet, we still see Americans' confidence in higher education continuing to fall. So I want to tell you why you stay in college. And I was hoping there'd be more students here, but I'm going to tell you, faculty and staff, why students are going to stay in college, because I want you to tell them, because they don't know. It's really worth it, but it's not about the money. New economists have found that the college wage gap and the college income wealth gap, it's kind of, if you have a whole lot of loans out, the $1 million you're supposed to make more than high school students kind of gets evaporated over time. But, so, not really about the money. But you're going to live a lot longer. People with a bachelor's degree live much healthier lives than people without a bachelor's degree. You'll experience less despair. Despair is on the rise in the United States. People without a bachelor's degree have almost reported twice as much despair. And people with a bachelor's degree, yes, they've reported more, but less so. You're going to make some money. You're going to still make some money. There's an economist who reports that because of this lack of confidence in higher education, there will be about 8.5 million Americans missing bachelor's degree holders. And those are jobs that we will not fill. We are hitting not just a demographic cliff, we're hitting an economic crisis because there are jobs for bachelor's degree students that aren't going to be filled. Yes, the fastest growing jobs are with people with a high school diploma. You will never make more than $31,000 a year. Your community is better off too. The more people with a bachelor's degree in a community, lower rates of incarceration, lower rates of obesity, higher life expectancy, higher birth weight rates, and higher rates of voting. It's a positive contagion that affects your whole community. I want to talk about this. I love this idea. It's so cool. So we know cultural capital and social capital. That's like you've got money, you've got the blue book, and you're invited to the right parties. Okay, cool. Good for you. Aspiration, this is Tara Yoso's framework about different types of capital, different types of wealth that we carry. So she talks about aspirational capital. How many people came to higher ed, wherever you went to college, how many people came to higher ed with these dreams? that you were going to make life better for yourself and for your family and for your community. You had aspirational dreams. How many people came with that? Yeah, you did. How many people came with familial capital? You understood you have a whole community behind you. It's notions of kinship. It's notions of community that you had. And they're part of your life, like it or not. They're part of your life, right? How many people, and that's a wealth that a lot of people don't have. How many people came into higher ed with familial capital? They got your back. How many people came with navigational capital? You know how to navigate systems. It seems like a wall, you see a crack. You can get through that crack. You know, you know how to move through systems. You know there are barriers, but you know you can get through those barriers one way or another. How many people came with navigational capital? Nice. How many people came with linguistic capital? How many people came having had different models of language, whether it's multi-language or oral language or storytelling, different modes of language? You came with different ideas of language. Yep. And then this is my favorite because this is me. How many people came with this like burning desire to just break down systems of inequity, racism, patriarchy, and you just, yes, my sister. Yes. Yep, and it just burns in you, and it's the best. So I wanted to take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I wanted to pull out his little thing on belonging, and I wanted to make my own hierarchy of belonging. So this is belonging within a diaspora. At the very bottom is this idea of presence. You're just here. You're connected to a time, to a place, to a court. You showed up. That's presence. You belong because you showed up. Good for you. It's temporal, right? It could be for a moment. Maybe it's for a lifetime. You're always going to be Gen X or Gen Z or millennials or whatever the heck you are. Then there's belonging as affinity. You like the Orioles, I like the Orioles. We're gonna have fun, right? You like this band, I like that band, that's it. But then there's belonging as purposeful. What's your purpose? What's your purpose? And that, to me, I think is really good belonging. And then this idea of community cultural wealth. When students are in groups and there are people in the groups who are dissenting, they do better work. They reach different conclusions. Their ideas are more divergent, and they actually feel like, wow, we got something done. Consensus is the enemy of innovation. So my oldest daughter is into the machine learning stuff. And whenever I ask her, so how's your work going? She tells me, I could put the phone down, and then I could come back and say, oh, that's so interesting, because I have no idea what she's saying. She turned me on to this researcher, Dr. Alison Gopnik. Pretty cool. So Alison Gopnik has studied child-baby psychology, developmental psychology, her whole life. And she's done so with, great success. Now, all the bros in Silicon Valley who are trying to teach generative AI how to do things and have to feed it so much information to have it learn a thing are finally turning to these geniuses like Dr. Alison Gopnik and saying, so how do babies learn? We need help. It's so hard to train a model, right? It's so hard to get generative AI to identify like a cancerous mole. You have to feed it so much information. And so my daughter saw her talk, and so here are some of her books. And this one study that she talks about is where a 1-year-old, like babies are geniuses. She talks about a study on 1 year of kids who are 1 year old. And if you drop a pen, that kid's going to go over and pick up that pen and hand it to you. Unless they see you throw the pen, and then they don't go get the pen. Like at 1 year old, they're like, oh, I see your situation. I think that's so cool. But she talks about this purpose. And I know we've talked about power of place, right, which is another campaign. I think the power of purpose is stronger. And she talks about as babies, as being young, explore. Go crazy. Just explore everything. And babies do. They've put GoPros on babies, and it's like, woo! Right? Because they're exploring wildly. And she talks about making a mess, model building exploratory social learning systems. And that just ask questions and explore everything. The college has so much to offer you. Millions and millions of dollars are here for you to explore. There's so much to explore. Don't hold yourself back. Don't feel like you have to belong to anything. Just explore everything. And then she talks about, at my age, we exploit. We don't explore anymore. We don't have the energy for it. We're just exploiting. And I think that's one thing we need to help students do better. Exploit everything. The library, your professors, different clubs. Like, find all the networks that you can and exploit them, exploit them, exploit them. And I know it has a negative connotation. It's not negative. It's exactly what you should be doing. You should be checking in and draining every resource we have. It's all here for you. This is right outside of my office. Look at that. There is so much to explore and exploit on this campus. And I welcome you to do it. If you're not, if you came to college to belong, you never would have left home. So go out and explore and exploit. There's a lot waiting. Not belonging is not your exit strategy. This is in my neighborhood. Y'all means all. Thanks, y'all. And I want to thank just a handful of people. My husband, Scott Moore, Abby Moore, Tig Moore, Leslie Goldstein, Elvira England, Bill Magrin, and Christine Smith for your help. That's it. Thanks, you guys.